summarize some basic concepts of design and the impact design has in society?
I'm not like formally trained in design, I guess you could say. Like I guess what drew me to it was mostly photography and videography and the composition of really, really nice shots. And it's always simplicity and minimalism. I think also pull a lot of inspiration. I mean, I'm very basic, but like Johnny Ive, who's was the lead designer at Apple for a long time, but he comes up and was a student of, the Bauhaus movement essentially in Germany, and specifically Braun, who was an industrial designer from Germany who did a lot of like, before there was Apple, there were still gadgets and gizmos, like an alarm clock or an electric razor or a toaster, right? But Braun was one of the best industrial designers of his time, and everything had purpose and intent, and it was still beautiful, right? So it was this perfect balance of form and function. You could argue that the iPhone is that for today, and objectively, I believe will be one of the greatest industrial design moments of our species to date. And so I think this growing trend of minimalism, simplicity has been happening for decades. We spoke about it in fashion, so that informed me for decades, and it's a really challenging balance to find. You could just like live in a white box and call that minimalism and simplicity, but there's still like no function there. So I think that's the beautiful challenge that I'm always facing is how can I be clean, simple, minimal, but still have a personality and still have an attitude. And I wish I had a more a better response to how to get there. But again, I don't have any formal training in that regard. If you think of like photography, there are simple things like the rule of thirds and depth and understanding like the object that you're shooting. The spacing in the camera, I think is really important. Something else that I've paid a lot more attention to is just like the negative space within any image or the object, or just coloring, the mood, the vibe. All these different components can go into it. And then also, again, a trend that we spoke about at the top of this conversation, the rawness and the realness, right? So it's funny, I was having a conversation with my 8-year-old nephew who obviously doesn't have strong photography skills yet, but I was like, Eli, part of the reason why I love photography and especially shooting on the iPhone is because I feel like a lot of times the best images are the organic ones, and the moments, right? The in-between moments that we see, but we're never able to capture. But if we can capture that, I think that's really powerful. Throw out all of the composition best practices and the coloring and the lighting. But if you're able to capture a moment, more so like a space and time, I think that's really powerful. But for me, it's really infused into most aspects of my life. And when I think about design, honestly, like it's everything. So it's
even your own life.
Yes. So I've like pulled back the aperture to that point of view. And I was having a conversation last night with my wife in our community group, and we're talking about hurriness and how we're all busy and how this hustle culture is the thing. And if you're not busy, people look at you weird. And that comes back, I believe, to our egos, and more importantly, not knowing what we want to accomplish in any certain time period, whether it's a day or your life. And Rich, you've been a big inspiration for me in this department. And I've really sat down and have started to write out and essentially design my life, right? What do you want? What do you want to become? How do you want to look back on your time here on Earth and feel good about it? And so do you want to be a writer, a reader, a good friend, a good partner? All these things I'm sure people want to do. So then how can you design your life and set yourself up to achieve these these personality traits, these identity traits. So design for me started like quite small, enjoying photography, videos, movies, films, but it's really broad, and design, I think, is really everything. And inspiration for me has been Johnny Ive, Steve Jobs, obviously, um, some like industrial artists, and more recently, who I heard speak about this topic specifically was Brian Chesky, who's the founder of Airbnb, but also studied at RISD and really loves design, and believe when he kind of started getting me to think this way, but design really is everything.